In Genesis chapter 31, we see the beginning of an amazing story of someone wrestling with God in prayer. So it's not wrestling against demons necessarily, although there is a kind of spiritual warfare. Paul said we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but we do wrestle. And that is a reality. But in Genesis chapter 31, we see the story where Jacob's been living for 20 years away from his family. He's been living with his father-in-law, Laban. And finally the Lord says to him in verse 3, "Return to your land, the land of your fathers, and I will be with you." It's time to go home. And that was the first bit of direction that he's heard from the Lord in 20 years. And this isn't necessarily good news, because the first thing that comes to his mind is his father-in-law. So it's not just as easy as taking your wives, he's got 2 wives, and all the babies and all the children, picking them up and taking them and leaving, because Laban's not going to just let that happen. And that certainly was the case. Started talking to his wives right away about their father, and the wives are concerned about leaving Dad. And he said, "But your father's changed my wages 10 times." Verse 7. He said that he's sold us for nothing. He's taken advantage of us, and so he wants to leave. But he's got a word from the Lord that he is to leave. So he leaves, and everything goes bad. He's under tremendous pressure right from the start, because Laban, the father-in-law, chases him. And it's really intense. And so he has to have this whole sit down with Laban and explain, and it becomes a major argument. Sometimes when God tells you to do something, it's difficult. It's not easy. You have to work with people. You have to face realities. Even though this was the will of God, it wasn't easy. There's a naive simplicity that says, if it's the will of God, it'll be smooth and synchronized. If it's not the will of God, it'll be difficult and fraught with problems. Well, that's not true. That's not a good rule of thumb. He has direction from the Lord, but there's people and people issues, and so he has a difficult time leaving Laban's grip. Plus, God said, it's time for you to go back to the land of your fathers. That means facing his brother Esau. The last thing he heard as he was fleeing was Esau's voice saying, "Next time I see you, I will kill you. You're a liar. You're a cheat. You'll do anything to get ahead." And going home means facing an unresolved conflict with his brother Esau, who's threatening to kill him. So he's in the will of God, but he's got to get out of the grip of Laban, and he's got to get past his brother, who's wanting to kill him. Not an easy thing to do. Excuse me. So Jacob walks before the Lord. The Lord reassures him that I'll be with you. And even though he has a promise, he still has fears. And so he separates his wives, separates them into 2 camps, separates his children into 2 camps. All his belongings. He's got a vast herd. He's got camels. He's got she-asses and donkeys and sheep and goats, men servants, male servants, or female servants. He's been prospered over this period of time. When he left home, he said, all I had in my hand was a stick. And now he's coming back with vast herds, all kinds of employees and children and wives. Tremendous thing. And he doesn't want to lose any of it. And so he comes up with a strategy of dividing it. So he says, if Esau attacks me here, I can protect this over here. If he attacks me over there, I can protect this here. So he's thinking the whole thing through. You could tell that even though he has direction from the Lord, he's really nervous about what Esau might do. He even comes up with a strategy of sending him gifts. And so he sends servants with gifts to appease Esau before he even sees them. He's doing everything he can in his power to make this thing work. And then there's this moment where everybody's been put to bed. I picture Jacob out underneath the stars at night in the hill country as he's heading back home. There's just a river between him and home. And he's got everyone settled down for the night. The sheep are settled down. The kids are settled down. His wives are settled down. And he comes around this rock, and there's a man. And the man that he never saw before, standing in front of him. And it doesn't say who started it, but all of a sudden one of them went into a wrestling posture. And Jacob has been wrestling before he was even born. He was wrestling with his brother in the womb as to who is going to be the firstborn. He'll do anything to get ahead. He was named that right from birth because he's got a hold of his brother's heel, trying to pull him back in the womb. And so he's a wrestler. That's his nature. And this man, this stranger, out under this moonlit night, confronts him, and there's not much said between them, and all of a sudden they go into this wrestling posture. And the way I picture it, my movie version of it, is they go at each other like two rams hitting each other. You could hear the thud, the groan of hitting. Throw each other down. One gets on top and then flips the other, and they go at it again, and they hit each other. They lock arms. Tremendous strength being exerted, and they're wrestling in the desert, and so there's the grit of sand and getting in their eyes, getting in the folds of their clothes, getting under their skin. They get up, they go at each other again, they pull each other, they work to try to get on top of each other to be the one to pull the other one down. I picture their clothes eventually being torn off or thrown off because they're getting in the way. And it says that they wrestled until dawn, until the breaking of the day. The new day is starting to come up, and the man who Jacob was wrestling says, let me go, for day breaks. Let me go. And Jacob won't let go of him. And he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And somehow that came right out of Jacob's heart. He knew this man was not an ordinary man. And he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And I could just see the man, here they are, they're looking at each other, they're perspiring, they're red, they got huge red welts all down their sides, their knuckles are scuffed up, their skin maybe has been scraped and bruised in places, and they've been wrestling all night, they're perspiring, and this man's looking down into the face of Jacob. Jacob's on the bottom, and the man says, let me go, because it's dawn is breaking. New day is breaking. And he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And I picture the man smiling. He says, what's your name? Jacob said, my name is, I will do anything to get ahead. And he really would do anything to get ahead. And the man said, from now on, your name shall be, you are a prince with God. You have authority with God. Totally different name, totally different nature, totally different, not just a name change, from Israel, from Jacob to Israel, but a character change. He's been walking with God for a long time, and there has been a gradual character change. But this is like the finishing thing that God wanted to do with him before he crossed that river, before he went back into his home. He didn't want to just bless him, he wanted to change his character. He didn't want to just make him rich, he wanted to change his character. He didn't want to just bless him with things, he wanted to change his name. He wanted to change his nature. So he went from Jacob to being Israel, a prince with God, someone who walks with God, someone who has authority with God. It's a whole different day. And then the man stood up. I picture him kind of exhausted, walking away and walking into the sunrise. And Jacob's laying there. He's exhausted too. He's been wrestling all night. And he lays there, and all of a sudden it occurs to him that he just saw the face of God. And he renames the name of the place Penn, which means I've seen the face of God and I lived. He saw the face of God and he saw favor. He saw the favor of God. He saw God's eyes. Now I believe that there are different times in the Old Testament where Jesus actually manifested himself thousands of years before he came as a baby in a manger and walked on the earth. I believe it was Jesus. I have no trouble believing that this was Jesus that he was wrestling. He's a man, and in my Bible it's a capital M. Obviously, that's usually reverence for God. He's not just an angel. I believe it's somehow an experience with Jesus before Jesus was. Jesus was I am that encountered Moses. He was the rock. He was the water out of the rock. He was all those things before he was. And so, but it's an amazing moment. Jacob laid there basking in the favor of God, basking in a sense that God saw him and liked him. God saw him and looked at him and smiled at him, and it just totally wrecked him, totally blew him away. In fact, when he saw Esau, he and Esau met, and the thing he couldn't get over, he said, I saw the face of my brother Esau, and his face had favor toward me. In other words, it's something that was a slight reflection of the face that he'd seen when he was wrestling with Jesus or wrestling with God. There's favor in his brother's face as well. And that just changed everything. All the things that he was fearing, all the things he was dreading, none of it happened. It's one of the most beautiful examples of wrestling for something and having your name changed in the process. And he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. What a prayer. Isn't that what you're after? Isn't that what you want? You want God not just to give you things, and not just to give you finances, not just to give you solutions, and not even just to get you out of your problems or help you with your fears, but you want a name change in the process. Well, you have to wrestle for that. Amen? Amen.